Hi, Lee. Do you need to be let into the meeting? No, you're in.
Hi, I just wanted to check in with you to let you know that I'm going to be removing the last two agenda items and re-referring those.
Okie dokie. Well,
Thank you.
that makes it easier. All right, thank you.
Hello, Gwen. Whenever you're ready and the time has come, we're ready to go on this end.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gwen.
Good afternoon. I'm going to commence Administration and Finance Committee. It is September 22nd, 2021. We are still holding virtual meetings. You can go to the City of Missoula website and go to the meetings and agenda page and find the link for this meeting to attend virtually. You can also get in touch with us by leaving City Council a voicemail. The phone number is 406-552-6012, and you can always email council also. The email address is council@ci.missoula.mt.us. Lisa, could you do roll call, please?
Sure thing. Stacy Anderson. Looks like Stacy's out today. Mirta Becerra.
Present.
John Contos.
Here.
Heather Harp. Let's see, looks like Heather is out today. Jordan Hess.
Present.
Gwen Jones.
Present.
Julie Merritt.
Present.
Jesse Ramos.
Present.
Amber Sherrill.
Present.
Sandra Vasica.
Present.
Brian Von Losberg.
He is not here today.
Absent today. And Heidi West.
Present.
So that's 9 present and 3 absent.
Great, thank you very much. We have minutes from September 15th, 2021. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved, and I'll call for public comment on items not on the agenda. If anyone's interested, please raise your hand. But we have no one attending. So back to the main meeting. Just to let everyone know, items 3.5 and 3.6 are being pulled off of this agenda and will be referred back again in the future. Those are regarding the radio and communications equipment leasing agreement and purchase. So 3.5 and 3.6 are not on the agenda. First item 3.1 is for a contract for FileVine sales order and license agreement. And I have Jim Nugent listed as presenting on this.
Gwen, is Colleen also a panelist? Because I worked on the contract, but Colleen's the one that can best explain
Yes.
case management program. So perhaps I'll defer to Colleen and let her take it from there.
Great. Colleen.
Okay, so this is a part of our capital improvement program. You may recall we discussed it during budget. We initially had come before you a year ago with a contract. We had some irreconcilable differences and we had to suspend that contract, and we were refunded all of our monies. Since that time, we went out to RFP and chose a vendor from that RFP, which is FileVine. A couple of main reasons that we've gone with FileVine was budgetary, for one. They do have a no storage fee. The other vendor that was in the running with them had a $3,600 fee per terabyte for storage, because this is a cloud-based case management system, which would amount to what we're running right now is $54,000 just on storage fees for the year. So when we balanced out each of the different vendors, this was the most cost efficient, but also we found that they will meet our needs the best. Yellowstone County also went away from the very first vendor that we had, and they have selected FileVine, and they are in the midst of developing this database. And so I've been keeping in close touch with them so we can collaborate on building it and making it usable for some of the bigger cities in Montana. Missoula County has also chosen FileVine, and one of the reasons, discussing with Carl Horton, our IT director, he was a proponent of us sticking with Missoula County if it was doable. So a couple of other things I'll just mention. This will be one database now for our department. It will be customized and built so that it can meet the needs of all of our divisions. Primarily right now, we were just using for prosecution, paperless office, and now this will be for civil and criminal, and we will move our civil division to being far more paperless as well. Currently, as you can see, we are under the budget that's on our CIP that I have up on the screen, and I'll explain a little bit of that. The one-time fees presented on the FileVine, $32,500, is for the building of the templates, the documents, the reports, training, getting us going. The annual reoccurring fees will be the license fees, the maintenance fees, and that for FileVine. FileVine works with a company called BitLink. BitLink will write the interfaces that we currently need. One is to the law enforcement records management system, and it will interface and bring in the cases the police department refers to us. We currently have that with JustWare now. It's critical in keeping the staffing levels we have. Without it, we would need to increase our staff. But right now we're using the electronic means. So I do not have the interface bids yet or quotes yet. But from what I've been told by the county, the quotes that they received for these two different interfaces will be well below what we still have in our CIP budget here, which is still remains $71,566 after our initial payment for the beginning of this project. And there will be a few annual maintenance fees as well for those interfaces. So I won't know the exact annual reoccurring fees, but we will have to discuss next year because it will increase our baseline at that point, but it's uncertain yet at this time what that would be. Questions?
Thank you, Colleen. Appreciate all of the work that's gone into this and the research. Are there any questions from council? Ms. Merritt. And actually, if you want to pull down the share screen there, so that we have our, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Merritt.
Colleen, thank you very much for all this hard work. I imagine that it was incredibly frustrating to have that first vendor just totally flop on us. I know how much staff time goes into projects like this, and then very disappointing to have y'all's time wasted by that vendor. So I'm glad that we found somebody new who can do the job, and I'm happy to hear that they are going to be customizing this to the needs of our offices. So I appreciate that, and I'm happy to make the recommended motion.
Great, thank you. And let the record reflect that Stacy Anderson is present. I'm not sure if anyone else came in who was not here for roll call, let me know. It's hard to track with this many windows. Okay, any other questions from council, first of all, on this item? All right, we have a motion on the floor that is in order, and I'll call for public comment. We have no one attending. Seeing no other questions, we'll take a roll call vote on this item.
All right. Stacy Anderson,
Yes.
Mirta Becerra,
Yes.
John Contos,
Yes.
Heather Harp,
Yes.
Jordan Hess,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Julie Merritt,
Yes.
Jesse Ramos,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Vazika,
Yes.
Heidi West.
Yes.
So that's unanimous for all in attendance.
Thank you. That will go on the consent agenda. And thanks, Jim and Colleen. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Next item is 3.2, an amendment to the Corporation for Supportive Housing Contract for Services. And Montana James is here to present on this item.
Good morning. Montana James, Deputy Director of the Community Development Division within Community Planning, Development, and Innovation at the city. And I have before you today a request for a contract amendment to contract A8172 with the Corporation for Supportive Housing to provide technical assistance and partner engagement support in the development of a supportive services budget and service package for the Trinity Permanent Supportive Housing and Navigation Center projects. In fiscal year 21, City Council allocated $50,000 to build capacity and provide for technical assistance support for the development of this service package for Trinity. And we originally scoped the phase one of that budget at $35,000 based on consultation with the TA providers and the scope of work that we agreed on at that point. And we're now requesting to add $3,000 to that contract in order to pay lived experts in the houseless system for their time and expertise in the service package identification process. Excuse me. I would just add this is a really important part of the overall values of our Reaching Home program, to ensure that we're building meaningful input from our residents who are unhoused in the kind of scope of services and that overall budget of the Navigation Center. So the contract amendment also proposes to extend the period of service for the contract through December 31st of this year, also to better reflect the project timeline as we have it scoped now. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Montana. Any questions from council regarding this contract amendment? See none, I will be looking for a motion. Merta.
I'm happy to make the motion.
Thank you. That motion is in order, and I'm calling for public comment on the motion. There's no one in the attending room. So any other questions from council regarding this matter? We will have a roll call vote. Thank you.
Casey Anderson,
Yes.
Mirta Becerra,
Yes.
John Contos,
Yes.
Heather Hart,
Yes.
Jordan Hess,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Julie Merritt,
Yes.
Jesse Ramos,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Vasica,
Yes.
Heidi West.
Yes.
So that is unanimous for all in attendance.
Thank you. That can go on the consent agenda. And then we have the final two items, both of which involve the Bridge Apartments. The first item is to approve the buy-sell agreement to purchase 1205 West Broadway, known as the Bridge Apartments. And Dale, are you with us today to present on this? There he is. Good morning.
We have a team here, but I think the mayor is going to introduce the project to us.
Excellent. Thank you. Mayor Engen.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for your time this morning. We're happy to be able to present this item to you for your consideration, and I hope approval. As you know, we have been in negotiations to acquire the Bridge Apartments on West Broadway for some time, and have completed those negotiations and are now bringing you the contract for your consideration. Ms. Merritt pointed out during a council discussion some time ago that the best way to keep people housed and to prevent homelessness is to keep people who are housed. In this case, there are about 20 residents who represent a vulnerable and difficult to house population in our community. And when this property became available on the general market, the city of Missoula was very interested in acquiring for the purposes of making sure that these folks remained housed. I believed at that time and still believe that the city of Missoula is the best buyer to ensure that long-term use that was funded by public resources originally remains the use for that facility. Our intention here is not to own or operate the facility in the long term. That's not part of our core competency. May have to be someday, but today it isn't. But we do know that we're the right bridge owner and can craft an agreement with a subsequent owner and operator to ensure that the folks living there and subsequent tenants who also have similar challenges will have a safe and affordable and supportive place to live in our community. So staff has worked really hard and effectively to get this transaction before you in relatively short order. Western Montana Mental Health Center, the current owner, has had has a strong desire to move this along quickly, and we've done what we can to accommodate them. We will purchase this property using Missoula Redevelopment Agency resources. TIF funding. It is entirely appropriate, I think, given our emphasis on housing, both citywide and certainly at the redevelopment agency to make this investment. And again, our intention is to hold this for a time, ensure that it continues to be used the way it's used in perpetuity, and move along using the proceeds again from the sale of this property to support housing in the long term. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over, with your permission, Madam Chair, to Mr. Bickle, who can describe some details for you.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Mr. Bickle.
I'm actually going to pass it off again to John Adams, who's got a presentation on the details of the process we went through to bring this forward. But Madam Chair will note that Councilman Ramos has his hand raised.
Right. Mr. Ramos, did you have a question?
Yeah, and maybe Dale is getting to this. I was just wondering kind of what the explanation was from Western Montana Mental Health. I mean, I think it's pretty despicable what they're doing, and I think a lot of folks would agree with me on this. But I was just kind of wondering, I mean, they put us in a really tough spot, in a really difficult situation, and got a lot of taxpayer money for this. And I think the fact that they're not holding up their end of the bargain is pretty despicable, because that facility is full, as you've mentioned, and these folks really don't have another place to go. So it kind of really put us in a really tough situation. I was wondering what kind of freaking explanation they have, because it's just unbelievable what's going on with them and the mess
Right.
we're having to clean up.
Right.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to take a run at that.
You know, if now's the time, and whatever your preference is, it is. I think there are questions regarding it, but whatever your preference in terms of these presentation and timing, up to you.
You bet. I'll be mercifully brief in that. Western Montana has funding challenges. Those funding challenges come from a variety of circumstances, not the least of which is the Montana legislature reducing funding for mental health care in the state of Montana. I won't speak for Western Montana. I will tell you that at this point, they don't believe that this is an asset that they can continue to keep on their books and operate and continue to provide other services within the community. So I would let them speak for themselves. At this point, though, what I do know is that we are in a position to step in and solve for this, and we're proceeding accordingly.
Right. Thank you for that. All right, John, I believe we are to you now.
Sounds good. And I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully, doesn't work. Let me know.
Yes.
Excellent. So my name is John Adams. I'm the city's Brownfields Administrator based in community planning, development, and innovation. And as part of the internal team that has been navigating the potential acquisition of the Bridge Apartments, I'm going to set the table for us, and then Ellen Buchanan is going to speak on MRA's role in the acquisition, and Aaron Pahan is going to talk us through permanently preserving affordability for these apartments. I want to start just by giving you some geographic, putting the bridge in geographic context. As the mayor advised, the bridge is a small apartment complex at 1205 West Broadway between Broadway and the Clark Fork River. There are 20 units in the building and some common spaces. The bridge was built by Western Montana Mental Health, a community-based nonprofit mental health center, in 1997 to provide affordable housing to folks consistent with their mission. But as all nonprofits evolve, Western Montana's priorities and capacity have changed. And earlier this year, the Western put the bridge on the market. The mayor and staff pursued acquisition and succeeded in getting a backup offer accepted, and then had our offer accepted as the primary offer on August 2nd. Our intent is to work with a community partner to whom we can transfer the property in pretty short order so that they can own and manage the bridge as permanently affordable housing. Essentially, the city's unique capacity to finance a large purchase, accept some risk, and then discount the sale price will enable permanent preservation of 20 units of affordable housing. We wanted to acquire the bridge because we believed that a private entity that acquired the property at market rate would charge market rate rent. And we do not want to go backward on affordable housing here in Missoula. We also deemed that the bridge purchase was consistent with adopted city policies. So for example, the city's strategic plan calls for providing life-saving services for Missoula's vulnerable populations and keeping them housed. In this instance, given Missoula's housing market and bridge tenants' income bracket, we're almost certainly preventing homelessness for some of these particularly vulnerable individuals. Purchase would also be consistent with the city's housing policy, which calls for preserving income qualified affordable housing through helping community partners with acquisition. And finally, financing the purchase with tax increment revenue is consistent with the council's goal that MRA devote $1 million annually to support affordable housing projects. Under the terms negotiated with Western, the city will assume fee title on September 29, assuming council approval. We'll pay Western $2,195,000, which they'll deploy to support mental health in Western Montana. The purchase agreement included standard contingencies for due diligence, insurance, title review, appraisal, and it's contingent on city council approval. Staff don't have any concerns relative to any of the contingencies. We can ensure affordably, the title's clean, et cetera. But just to explain how we reached that judgment, I want to talk a little bit about the three biggest pieces of due diligence. The first of those is a phase 1 environmental site assessment. Tetra Tech, a local firm, completed a phase 1 for us. If you ask a bank for a loan to finance purchase of a commercial property, they'll typically require that you commission and submit a phase 1. And a phase 1 will essentially seek to ensure that you're not buying any environmental hazards or liabilities. So the environmental consultant will inspect the site and dig back through historic photographs and Sanborn maps, Sanborn fire insurance maps. So they're trying to identify what was at the site previously. They'll look through state and local databases, and they'll look for anything that might suggest that your property or a neighboring property is leaking diesel fuel into the aquifer, or that some previous use of the property could have tainted your soil. It's like a red flag report, where if there are any RECs, recognized environmental conditions, the consultant will flag those for further investigation. And in this instance, you can see Tetra Tech did not find any red flags. Second piece of due diligence was a building inspection, which anyone who's purchased a home will probably have seen done. This is an inspection of the structure itself to make sure that the foundation isn't crumbling, the roof isn't leaking, that you're not buying something that requires expensive fixes right away. And in this instance, the inspection by Inspect Montana came back really clean. The building's not particularly old, it has been well maintained, it's in good shape. There were really only some kind of deferred maintenance that you'd expect on almost any building, like drain spouts not pushing water quite far enough away from the foundation, or trees overhanging the roof. The one thing that particularly did worry us was that the heating system was failing. And as winter came on, we felt like replacing the boilers was a life safety issue. There's a big lag right now between commissioning work and getting it done, particularly for something like expensive boilers. And so we asked Western to address that, and they agreed to do that. They put $75,000 in escrow to pay for a new HVAC system. And those materials have been ordered and the work has been scheduled for October. The third piece of due diligence, the third big piece, was an appraisal. Local firm Kemble and Cassina evaluated the market, looking at apartment buildings, comparable apartment buildings in Missoula, and concluded that the building is worth $2,195,000. So those were the big due diligence pieces. Next steps, should council authorize purchases, that we'll contract for interim day-to-day property management, or potentially do that under existing contracts, while preparing a limited solicitation to find a community partner that can purchase and manage the bridge as permanently affordable housing. I do want to be clear that the difference between our purchase price and the sale price is essentially what makes permanent affordability possible. So ultimately, we'll ask council to approve a resale at a lesser price, and the difference would be covered by tax increment financing. So to talk more about that financing, we have Ellen Buchanan up next, to be followed by Aaron Pahan to talk about permanent affordability. Ellen?
Sure, thank you. Ellen Buchanan, Missoula Redevelopment Agency Director. State law is very clear in our ability to use tax increment funds to purchase real property and personal property. We've got the code site up here for your benefit as part of this slide. And it's clear we can acquire by purchase, lease, option, gift, grant, request, device, eminent domain with conditions on eminent domain, of course, or otherwise any real property and personal property that may be necessary for the administration of the provisions in this part, which is the urban renewal law in state statute. If you could go to the next slide, John. So it's clear that we have the ability to use funds in this manner. The way this purchase will be financed is that since we don't know how long we will hold the property, and hopefully not for long, and because Urban Renewal District 2 does not have enough uncommitted cash available to do a cash purchase of the property, the city will provide internal financing in a bridge type fashion for a short period of time. But in the meantime, the MRA board has approved the use of tax increment funding to bridge any gap between what we pay for the property as opposed to what we resell the property for. And as John pointed out, we believe that it will have to be a discounted sale in order to maintain this property as permanently affordable apartments. And in the event that a purchaser cannot be found, we would use TIF funding to reimburse the city for the purchase. That will require the issuance of tax increment revenue bonds, which are approved by the city council for reimbursement to the city. Board also approved up to $10,000 for project management. If costs exceed the or to capacity, then council will be required, as I said, to approve an issuance of tax increment revenue bonds. I will say that in terms of justification for the purchase, if you even go back to the Urban Renewal District 2 Urban Renewal Plan, there's very clear reference in that plan under the goals of providing housing for people of all incomes, ages, and backgrounds. And one of the primary objectives is to encourage a balanced mix of investment, rental, and owner-occupied housing opportunities, which address a variety of costs, incomes, and special needs. I believe this acquisition is absolutely the poster child for those goals and objectives. I don't know if I have another slide to speak to or not, John.
I think you're up for, we're up for Aaron.
Good. Thank you.
Jesse, I'm going to have you hold off until we finish the presentation. All right. I see your hand there, but go ahead, Erin.
Erin Pahan with Community Planning, Development, and Innovation. And I'm just going to talk to you briefly about our goals around permanent affordability for the site. So regarding the current tenants, our goal is, of course, zero displacement. We want to ensure that everyone who is residing at the Bridge, who calls the Bridge Apartments their home today, will continue to call the Bridge Apartments their home for as long as they wish to do so. So to achieve that, we're partnering with the Missoula Housing Authority to place housing choice vouchers on site for all eligible and interested households. So today, the tenants of the Bridge pay roughly $450 per month for their apartment. That is incredibly affordable in the city of Missoula, based on what we know to be market rate, closer to $800 or $900 for a one-bedroom apartment. However, with the placement of these housing choice vouchers, folks will pay based on their income, not based on that flat rate. And many individuals will see their rent actually decrease by several $100s per month. And so we are actively working through that process for all 20 units to provide that additional subsidy and to actually increase the sustainability and the ability for those individuals to meet all of their needs and have housing consume less of their limited income. We are also working on a permanent affordability structure. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to ensure affordability for the life of the building. Some of those can come through a deed restriction, a contract, We will probably wait to choose a mechanism to ensure affordability until we have an operational partner, ideally identify that that entity, as the mayor mentioned, who has expertise in owning and operating permanently affordable housing, to come in and work with us on that. Oftentimes, financing structures may be impacted or limited by the tool that we choose to use, and all tools get us to our goal at the end of preserving affordability. And so we want to work with that partner to make sure that we deploy a tool that works for them and their particular financing structure. And then one really important piece about maintaining that permanent affordability is working through that ownership transfer to ensure both operational and capital sustainability through robust reserves. Today, the Bridge Apartment has very limited operational and capital reserves, which goes back to this not really being a part of Western Montana's primary mission and the devastating cuts to financing, or I'm sorry, to reimbursement that they have received over the years. So we want to work to shore that up so that City Council is not seeing a future owner come back in 5 years and 10 years saying we can't replace the roof or we're struggling with programming. And so that we know that the decisions that we're making today regarding affordability and transfer of ownership are ensuring sustainability for this as a permanently affordable rental apartment building for decades and decades to come.
Great, thank you. Anything else from the team at this point in terms of your initial presentation? Great, I did have a couple of questions in terms of, maybe Ellen, you can answer this, or Dale. So we've got basically a $2.2 million purchase price. The long-term goal is to resell it, probably at a discounted price to ensure affordability in perpetuity. So ultimately, if we're not able to sell it, we would finance this through bonding. But I'm assuming that we're going to be able to resell it with the discounted price then, and the city closing the gap. Will that be cash, or will that be bonded, or do we know the answer to that yet?
I'll take a stab at that. Sorry. I think it's going to depend on how much the discount is, and it will depend on how long it takes to get that done, and other projects that may have tied up cash available in that district. So it's a moving target. You know, if we were to do it today, I think we've got in our current budget, or two has keeps changing. I'm sorry. We've got about $1.2 million that's unobligated today.
Okay.
So if we've got, and I don't think we would ever want to take all of the cash in that district this early in the fiscal year and expend it so that no other projects could be done. So there's a likelihood that it would require bonding in either event.
Great, thank you. I figured there's still a lot of pieces of information that need to come in. And this is, of course, the initial phase, but I just wanted to know if there were thoughts on that to date. Okay, we've got several counselors who've got their hands raised. Mr. Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions here. Do you want me to just kind of rattle them off, or go one at a time?
Let's just go one at a time.
Okay. So I guess I just want a little clarification from Ellen. So are we saying that initially we would have to bond just to acquire the building, or are you saying that there's going to be kind of a stopgap? Could you, if you clarify that, kind of what our plans are? It was a little confusing on that slide.
So if we were using TIF funds to make this purchase today, we would have to issue bonds in the amount of about $2.2 million, which City Council would have to issue. If the city, the plan is that the city is able to float this, understanding that it's not a long-term obligation on those funds, then we don't have to bond today. We can see how this plays out. If we sell it and we have to discount it $1.5 million, just to pull a number out of my ear, obviously we don't have the cash in district to pay that gap. So we would have to issue bonds in that event. If we sell it for, $1.5 million, then we probably have adequate cash in the district to bridge that difference between $1.5 million and $2.2 million. So that, I mean, it's a moving target until we know that we have a buyer and what that purchase price might be in order for this to remain permanently affordable housing.
Right,
Okay.
and maybe Dale wants to add to that. It sounds like, however, for the next few months, we don't necessarily need a bond. The city is able to float that cash in the hopes that there's a short-term, we're able to sell it sooner than later. Dale, did you want to just clarify that?
Yeah, and I did, so the city treasury is going to advance the purchase price with, knowing the approval of the MRA board to reimburse the city at its cost. The next item on the agenda in this meeting, you'll see, is the reimbursement resolution for the acquisition, and Leah is bringing that forward. And this is really an ordinary course of business for us on construction projects or these types of acquisitions where we normally actually use the treasury to float the actual cost, whether it's a construction project or an acquisition, and because that gives us the ability to size the bonds appropriately at the end. The reimbursement resolution allows us to make sure we get tax exempt status for those bonds, but we're able to size it. So right now, if we had to bond it ahead of time, we'd have to bond the full amount. It's likely that we will have to bond a lesser amount, and then this way we're able to not create a bond bigger than we need to.
Right. Thank you. Great. Did you have anything else, Jesse?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And that makes a lot of sense, Dale. I appreciate that. That certainly clicks with me a little bit better what we're doing here. So we're floating this money. What fund are we going to be floating this out of? Kind of a reserve fund, or what happens if the sale doesn't come through right away? We're just going to have to bond immediately with TIF because the city is in desperate need of that money right now, or kind of how's that work? It sounds like there's a sense of urgency to get the city paid back on that. So I'm kind of wondering where it's coming from and why there's that sense of urgency.
Well, we will fund it from the general city treasury. So it's all all of our funds are pooled, much like how a bank pools all its funds from all of its depositors and lends out money in those. So it's all of those availability. It does not impact the current budgets of any department. We maintain adequate cash reserves in the general fund and across all of our funds, this provides us the ability to float those type of things. Now, I will say that Councilwoman Jones mentioned long-term. We were going to try to do this. We're actually going to try to do it in the next few months, and that we hope to have identified a partner and to be able to do this, because I think by the close, specifically by the close of the fiscal year, we would intend to have this property conveyed and a bond issue finalized, so we can have that done in the fairly short term.
Okay, so in effect, we're using, I guess, what I refer to as the city's tier 1 capital, similar to a bank, just as a short floating loan, essentially, to the MRA. Then we'd want to try and get this all wrapped up by the end of the year. So meaning we're trying to find a end buyer, hopefully by the end of the year as well.
Yes.
And Dale, I think this is a question for you, Madam Chair. May I have a follow-up?
Sure. And I do have other people with hands raised. So why don't you ask this question, and then we'll move on and we can come back to you then if you have others. Okay. But go ahead.
So, I mean, you guys must have run some different business valuations and some different scenarios and cash flow scenarios based on kind of what Aaron was talking about, where maybe we have like a moving rate instead of the flat rate that's more adjustable to income. So I guess what purchase price would there need to be to make something like that possible? So how steep of a discount would the end buyer have to have in order for them to achieve what Aaron was talking about with that kind of flexible income driven monthly payments and the current tenants in it? What would that look like? Because I'm sure we've ran a bunch of scenarios.
I can speak to that briefly. So we are still currently running scenarios. One of those is dramatically impacted by our ability to add this voucher subsidy through the housing choice vouchers. And so essentially what that does is today, Western Montana Mental Health Center is being reimbursed for each unit through the direct rental payment from the tenant at $450 a month. So appropriately applying those housing vouchers allows a landlord to be reimbursed more appropriately for that unit up to that market rate value through that federal subsidy, and reduces the rent for the tenant. So it really is a win-win. And it increases the financial sustainability of the project long-term. And so we need to get all those vouchers into the facility to improve that operational sustainability. And then once we know what that new revenue flow is, that essentially tells us how much a future purchaser of the site is able to take on in debt and still make that project work. Taking into consideration, when you purchase multifamily or rental apartment buildings like this, you usually purchase them with healthy operational reserves. You establish healthy operational reserves in capital reserves, and you do that by increasing the rents. We don't want that to happen here. We don't want these rents to be increased for these tenants. And so we may have to subsidize the establishment of those capital and those operational reserves to make sure that this project is sustainable in the long run. And again, folks aren't coming back to us in 5 years, 10 years, needing some support. And so we're fine tuning all those numbers. I can't tell you that we have a number today, but everything that we're looking at tells us that that we should be able to sell this for a real value and bring that value back into the city of Missoula. This shouldn't be a situation where we're having to do a transfer to an entity without actualizing some of that original or seeing some of that original investment that we may come back to the city. What that number is, we're still working on.
Okay, and current revenues are roughly $108,000 a year. At $450 a month, 20 units. So it's about 108. Is that correct?
Well, that's the current rental revenue, but again, without those hardy operational and capital reserves, any vacancies can't be absorbed. And a very, very small issue, whether it's a flood or an HVAC issue, it quickly absorbs a lot of that revenue. And so, yeah, yep.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, I would assume there are different categories of purchasers, that this is going to be more in the nonprofit with a mission-driven type scenario for that purchaser to affect this kind of deal. Is that what you're looking at in terms of a buyer?
Yeah, that we are looking at that because I think you're right. This is a mission-driven project, but we also are looking specifically for an operational partner that has experience in permanent supportive housing. It's a very different type of operation than simply serving as a landlord in a market rate building. And so it's a particular expertise we need.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, moving on, Ms. Cheryl.
Thanks. I think most of my question actually have been answered via Jesse's questions in the presentation, but I guess I'm, Aaron, maybe this question's for you. I mean, is there any concern that we would not find that buyer that has a level of operational experience, or maybe it's a combination of a nonprofit and a philanthropic buyer? I don't know, but could you speak to that? Because to me, that seems like a big, aside from the final purchase price, seems like the big question mark that's still out there.
Yeah. So we have had several local partners already contact us and express interest and are working with us on what that model might look like. And so I think we will be in a position, and City Council will be in a position to consider several offers.
Great.
Thanks.
Ms. Merritt.
Thanks, everyone. I want to say thanks to the mayor and the staff for their hard work and perseverance seeing this effort through. I know that it's been on my mind since the news first broke that this building was being put up for sale. And I firmly believe that this is the right action for the city to be taking, and it's the right time for us to do it, because we have the ability to do it, to protect these vulnerable members of our community. Now is not the time to stand on ideology at the expense of these residents' lives. To be crystal clear, a vote against this action is a vote to throw 20 low-income families on the street with nowhere to go and no hope of finding affordable housing in our community. I would like to go ahead and make the recommended motion and put this on the floor. And I sincerely hope that this gets a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Julie. That motion is on the floor. I want to continue council questions before calling for public comment. So next is Ms. Anderson.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Merritt. I want to echo her words for this, or her words on this. These are the most vulnerable members of our community, and it is not an ideal situation that Western Montana Mental Health and the Montana legislature put us in this position, but we have numerous examples of where we've had to come in and sort of be the final stopgap for many members of our community who are on the brink, and this is the case for this situation. My question is for either Ms. Pahan or Mr. Bickle in regards to, obviously, we all hope that we're able to very quickly find a buyer, and we as the city just act as the intermediary to kind of preserve this in a permanently affordable way. What sort of measures will we be able to put in place with the seller or the purchaser of this property to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation like this again in the future? Kind of how are we going to make sure that we can is it a deed restriction, or I'm sorry if we talked about that in the presentation, but just want to make sure that we're, making sure that we're setting this up for long-term success with whomever it is that whoever the purchaser is after us.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've talked about it kind of scattered through a couple of different conversations. So I think what the city's doing now and the work that our staff and our teams are doing is essentially we're setting the project up for financial success and sustainability through the placement of these vouchers, through the due diligence that John Adams talked about, identifying the work that needs to be done so that we can set a number to what we know needs to be a capital reserve to address deferred maintenance over the course of the next 10 years, and also an operational reserve to ensure that facility can weather whatever storm comes its way. And we will create that sustainability, and that will be part of an RFP or a proposal that we send out looking for operational partners on that. And then the secondary piece is how do we protect our investment? And we have multiple tools or mechanisms to protect that investment. And once we identify that operational partner, we'll work with them on what tool best is applicable based on their individual financing. For instance, deed restrictions cannot be carried on properties with some specific financing streams or financing packages. And so we have other tools to use in those instances. And so we wouldn't want to choose a tool that would limit an operational partner's ability to finance this, but all of the tools get us to the same place, which is protecting this apartment building as permanently affordable for the life of the building, meaning that it will continue to serve the current tenants for as long as they want to be there, and tenants after them at the same level of affordability.
Thank you. Ms. West.
I just have a quick comment, and I just wanted to thank everyone for putting this together. I know as that it's challenging as nonprofit housing practitioners to pull together funding stacks to make projects possible, and it's just amazing that we have this opportunity to have an entity that is capable of swooping, getting in there quickly, and holding it so those more complicated details can be put together. So I'm really excited to see that future presentation about how these final details will come together to make it operational for the long term.
Thank you, Ms. Becerra.
Thank you. I apologize. My internet connection is pretty poor, so I might cut out. But I just wanted to say that a $2,195,000 for a building that has 20 apartments, if my math is not too flawed, that's about $110,000 per apartment. To me, that seems like a financially smart, civically responsible, in line with our goals to end homelessness move on the city's part. So I'm fully supportive. One question is, do we have commitment from the Housing Authority to provide the management of this if the resale takes longer than expected?
So the work that we've done on the management is actually with Western Montana Mental Health Center. So they will continue to manage the site while we work towards operational partnership or an ownership transfer. And that's ideal for a couple of reasons. I think it minimizes the changes and the impacts to the current tenants. Instead of going from Western Montana to an intermediary to a new owner, there will just be one transfer for them. And tenants who have already experienced a great deal of anxiety in the last 6 months about what their future and what their homes would look like. And so Dale has worked hard to get that agreement in place, and we'll continue to work with Western on management until we find that new ownership partner.
Thank you. Mr. Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a quick follow-up on Meredith's question, actually. She a great question, and it sparked a thought. Are we going to be paying Western Montana Mental Health for their management services? And if so, how much?
Yes, we will. We are still working out the details of what that management contract looks like. Because of our experience with our current property manager, we'll know. I mean, we know what the market is, and we should be able to stay in line with that. And both entities are working in the best interests of the tenants here in order to make this as seamless as possible. So we think that's an alternative that is going to work fine.
Great.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jesse.
Sorry, my connection's bad over here. So I just had a quick question kind of along the lines of Gwen's point, going the nonprofit sector versus a for-profit entity. Have you guys weighed any options or looked into any sort of tax credit availability for the end buyer? Ultimately, I know that there certainly are federal tax credits as well as state tax credits, and I know that those have kind of a different impact depending on if the developer is for-profit or nonprofit. I know that for example, a for-profit entity might be able to take those tax credits and use them directly on some of their passive income, and that might be a benefit. Or the nonprofit could theoretically monetize some of those tax credits depending on transferability or depending on kind of the corporate ownership structure. Have those tax credits been researched by the city at all, maybe as kind of a carrot for different entities to come in and ensure that affordability, and maybe even help lower the rent even further than above and beyond kind of what we're thinking about with the voucher systems, or maybe even offsetting it so that they could still achieve all of those objectives while still paying a decent repurchase price to us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think our primary goal is to find an experienced partner in the provision of permanently affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. And the nonprofit versus for-profit differentiation or distinction there is not as relevant. We actually have very qualified, experienced for-profit affordable housing providers across the city of Missoula and the state, and they would be wonderful partners in this instance. As it applies to tax credits, the primary vehicle to purchase and rehabilitate or construct new affordable housing as the low-income housing tax credit. That typically doesn't apply to acquisition only. It applies to acquisition and rehab for buildings that need some significant rehab. Thankfully, that is not the case as it applies to this project. But there are other vehicles and tools, and that is one of the reasons why we want to work with a skilled and experienced affordable housing provider, because they will know what those tools are, they will know how to access them, and they will know how to deploy them. And so that will be part of those conversations.
And I think too that if we understand some of those tools as well, we can maybe be a little bit firmer on a certain price if we know the different benefits that they're getting on the back end. Just kind of a thought, if we kind of familiarize ourselves with those, just so that we can get a better deal for ultimately the taxpayer and then the MRA as well.
Yes, and I think one important thing to note in that is that those tools are very time limited and very competitive. For instance, the most utilized tool for tax credits in terms of the acquisition and renovation of affordable housing is what's called a 9% low-income housing tax credit. Those are available once per year through the Montana Board of Housing, and it typically takes 2 to 3 rounds to get approved. And so the city would have to be comfortable owning and operating this site for a much longer period of time if we wanted to set some of those parameters on having a tax credit acquisition or something that would bring more money to the table. And so those are things we would have to weigh.
Great, thank you. We have a motion on the floor that is in order. I'm calling for public comment, but we have no one attending. Are there any other comments or questions from council or Mayor Engen? Mr. Ramos.
I just had some comments, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I completed all my questions. So I am not going to be able to support this today, and it's certainly not because I want people to be kicked out onto the streets or anything like that. I think there's a couple of reasons why I'm not supporting it. Number one, I think that it is basically malfeasance on the part of Western Montana Mental Health Center. I think it's absolutely disgusting what they did. There's going to be double taxpayer money used to buy the same building. And they can blame it on the legislature all they want. And they got between $5 and $10 million of PPP money. Their services were still in demand for a lot of that. So they have a good chunk of money, and I think it's very unscrupulous for them to try and blame this entirely on the legislature. Not to mention they currently have a model where I think it's sustained, especially because they have had taxpayer funds to help them with the cost. So I quite frankly don't buy that. That paired with their $5 to $10 million of PPP money, I think is totally bizarre. I think that if we were to just use general fund money or reserve money for this, I would certainly probably support it. But I cannot support this because I still do not believe that is in the spirit of the law of tax increment financing and what tax increment financing is meant for. Just like with the police showers and locker rooms, I certainly support the police and have been very vocal about that. I just couldn't support the use of TIF money for that. This operation, in my opinion, we have not worked out enough of the details. We've already said that this is essentially going to shackle us to debt potentially. Don't know what that's going to look like, what interest rates are going to look like, a variety of other things. I think that we need to go back and really try and negotiate with Western Montana Mental Health Center. I know we have a lot of tools at our disposal that we can use. I think it is absolutely absurd and quite frankly heartbreaking what's going on with the residents of these buildings, because it's not their fault. It's certainly not their fault at all. It's the fault of Western Montana Health Services that not only did they trust, but the city trusted, the taxpayers trusted. And this move is just one of the most disgusting things that I've ever seen anybody do. So with that, I'm not going to vote for something to make the taxpayers double commit to a mistake from a private entity, whether that's for-profit or nonprofit, they're still a private corporation. And I'm certainly not going to do it because I do not believe that this is in the spirit of the law of TIF. And I have a lot of people that agree with me, including the former director of the MRA, and people all across the state that understand TIF as well, if not better than I do. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to support this purchase today unless we were just using city general fund money and unless there was no obligation of TIF down the road.
Okay, any other comments or questions from council? Anything else from the team presenting today? All right, I did have a few thoughts that I wanted to share. I have watched this unfold for the last few months, and in any characterization of the situation, to have people with these issues who have this housing that is low income, so they're able to afford it, and have it pulled out from underneath them if it's sold into the private sector is incredibly concerning. And I know that the city had made runs at trying to buy this earlier. It had not worked out. Finally, the pieces did come together, for which I'm grateful. And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that local government, if it comes to us as a backstop, we need to figure it out and make it happen. I think it also begs the question, there is a much larger discussion here. I will be the first to admit that I don't know exactly what was going on with Western Montana Mental Health Clinic, that this had to be put up for sale. However, I would not be surprised, and it certainly seems logical, that if there are issues with financing stemming from state funds and or federal funding, then that is a story that needs to be told, because these are actions that are being taken by higher elected officials that have true ramifications on the ground in our community. And that information needs to be disseminated. That story needs to be told. I know that communications are often not prioritized when so much is on one's plate, but these are actions that are having huge impacts on some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And I would really like to have a much better understanding of the entire situation, because we are Montanans who need to take care of our own. We need to take care of our people here who live here, and that's what government should be doing. So I hope that story is shared. In the meantime, any other comments? Ms. Cheryl, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. Having run a nonprofit and been involved in nonprofit work most of my life, I don't think it's fair to say that legislative changes and funding changes don't put them in a difficult position where they might have to sell property. I mean, that is just the reality of the world. We rely on governmental support, we rely on donor support. And so I don't think that's an accurate portrayal of how nonprofits work. And I would disagree with my ward mate that, I think this is exactly what we need to be using TIF for. And as Gwen pointed out, it is a backstop to support our most vulnerable in this community. And for sure, we have heard, and I have heard loud and clear from constituents and people all over the city, that housing is our priority, housing and homelessness. And this does both. And I didn't say it before, but I'm really thankful for all the work that's been done on this, and the quick work and the forward thinking aspect of this. And will very happily and proudly be supporting it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to call for a roll call vote on this motion, which is on the floor. And then I know our last item is the reimbursement resolution. So we'll just do that next. We'll do this consecutively. So let's have a roll call vote on this item, please.
Stacey Anderson.
Yes.
Mirta Becerra.
Yes.
John Contos.
No.
Heather Harp.
Yes.
Jordan Hess.
Yes.
Gwen Jones.
Yes.
Julie Merritt.
Yes.
Jesse Ramos.
Regrettably, no.
Amber Sherrill.
Yes.
Sandra Vasica.
No.
And Heidi West.
Yes.
So 2, 4, 6. So we have 8 yeses and 3 nos.
Great, thank you very much. That can go on to committee reports, and thank you everyone for your time on this. And the last item is 3.5, oh, I'm sorry, 3.4, reimbursement resolution on the bridge apartment. So the financing mechanism here. Lee, to you.
Thank you, Lee Griffin, Finance Department. This is what we often call a housekeeping item. I am bringing a reimbursement resolution to City Council for approval. This reimbursement resolution, should we choose to, or will allow us to issue tax exempt debt for these bridge apartment, for the bridge apartment purchase, should we choose to. And this just keeps us in line with the Internal Revenue Service regulations around stating our intent, regardless of whether or not we choose a different path. But this will enable issuance of tax exempt debt. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Any questions regarding this item? Julie.
I don't have any questions, but I would like to go ahead and make the recommended motion and speak to it briefly, if I may.
Please go ahead.
I'm really grateful that compassion is in the majority on City Council here today, because as I said, no votes on these two items are votes to throw people on the street who are living on disability, who have developmental disabilities and other mental health issues, who have no hope of finding housing in our community anywhere in this day. And I just hope that you all who are voting against this, Councilman Ramos, Councilman Contos, and Councilwoman Vasica, that you could live with that, knowing that you chose to throw 20 families out onto the street.
All right, any other questions or comments? I'm calling, let me call for public comment first. Seeing none. Mr. Ramos.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond briefly to Councilwoman Mann, too, who I certainly have a lot of respect for, and I would like to see her level of towards myself and Sandy and John directed towards Western Montana Mental Health Center, because they're really the ones at fault here. They made promises that they did not keep. And they put us in a really tough position where I'm now forced to decide whether or not to uphold my oath, which is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Montana, as well as Montana state law, which I believe that this use of TIF is firmly violating, and throwing people out onto the streets. Obviously, Western Montana Mental Health Center had another offer on the table, which they were willing to take. The other buyer fell through. So they knew the city was here and they chose to not go with our offer because the other one was higher. So obviously they cared more about profit than the people they were supposed to represent. And the fact that you are not upset with West Montana Mental Health Center really says it all to me. I mean, yeah, we are here to certainly fill in gaps, but we're not here to fill in gaps where we've already tried to fill in gaps by giving taxpayer money to an entity that then screwed the taxpayers over and, more importantly, screwed the citizens over that live there. So I find it really disheartening that you're upset with me and Sandy and John for voting on principle and voting for what we think is right, and you think that we're doing it as some sort of weird grievance that we hate these people when we want them to be kicked out onto the street. That's not at all what I am doing, and I certainly think I can.
Seem to have lost Mr. Ramos. We are nearing the end of this.
Throw it onto the three of us over what.
All right, not sure what's going on, but Mr. Ramos seems to, his connection seems to have done him. Right, Jesse, you're cutting in and out and we can't hear you. I'm not sure that we're saying anything new at this point. I think there's definitely some disagreements on this. I'd like to wrap it up. Ms. Merritt, if we could just briefly hear from you, and then I'd like to take a vote on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Mr. Ramos has totally put words in my mouth. I am extremely upset with Western Montana Mental Health Center for the decisions that they've made. And I have been vocal about that point as well. So please do not put words in my mouth or assume for 1 second that you know what I'm thinking. Your choice today to vote no has consequences, and you need to be the one to live with them.
All right, thank you. Folks, if there's something new to be said, otherwise, I think we've covered this ground. And at this point, I'm going to call for a roll call vote. This will undoubtedly go into committee reports, and we can certainly say more on the council floor on Monday night. So could we please have a roll call vote?
Stacy Anderson,
Yes.
Mirta Becerra,
Yes.
John Contos,
No.
Heather Harp,
Yes.
Jordan Hess,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Julie Merritt,
Yes.
Jesse Ramos,
No.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Vazika,
No.
and Heidi West.
She had to leave. I
Okay.
believe.
All right, so that is 7 yeses and 3 nos.
Great, thank you. That will go onto committee reports also for Monday night. Thank you, everyone, and we will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.